Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is an iconic 1818 Gothic novel that is not only hailed as a great piece of fiction, but is often credited as being the first science fiction novel ever written. The story tells the tale of a young scientist and his hubris leading to the creation of intelligent life, which in turn leads to a cavalcade of endless tragedy. The novel warns against unchecked ambition, discusses what it really means to be human, and makes us wonder about who really is the monster of this story. And with that in mind, how did we go from this to this? Hello everybody, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Sid Says. It's called that because I'm Sid, and I'm saying things to you. Along with Dracula and Jekyll and Hyde, Frankenstein has always been a story I was fascinated with and kept reading over and over. But despite my love for the original story, I've never really consumed much Frankenstein media. And part of that is due to the lack of faithful adaptations. So what do these adaptations lack? To answer that, we must first take a look at the original novel. So there is some background I want to give about the author Mary Shelley that I think will shed some light on the story of Frankenstein. The first thing you should know is that Mary was a highly intelligent woman. Her mother was the famous feminist writer Mary Wollstonecraft, and her father, William Godwin, was also a philosopher and intellectual. While Mary's mother died very soon after she was born, William made sure that she was thoroughly educated, especially in writing. However, William and Mary would later go on to have a strained relationship, most of which stemmed from Mary entering into a relationship with Percy Shelley when she was just 16 years old and he was 21. And married. William obviously didn't approve of this relationship for these reasons, causing Mary to run away with Percy in order to be with him. Mary would go on to have a daughter with Percy when she was just 18 years old, naming her daughter Clara. But sadly, Clara was born prematurely and she would die only a few weeks after her birth, causing Mary to ponder the question, what if I could bring her back? The summer of the following year, in 1816, Mary and Percy would go with Mary's stepsister, Claire, to visit Claire's current fling, Lord Byron. And Lord Byron was a known, let's just say, fuckboy? But anyway, that summer was very cold due to a volcanic eruption blocking out the sun and causing terrible rainstorms. So Mary, Percy, Claire, Lord Byron, and Lord Byron's physician, John Polidori, were forced to stay inside during their stay with Lord Byron on the shores of Lake Geneva. To pass the time, they all decided to have a competition to see who could write the scariest story. Claire didn't participate because she was a little too busy being pregnant with a child that Lord Byron didn't want. Drama. John ended up writing a story about a wealthy lord taking advantage of a young man, much like himself. Double drama. But it would later be adapted into the novel The Vampire, so that's pretty cool. Percy wrote some gothic bullshit and Byron wrote a stupid poem, but the real gem of the competition was Mary's tale of a creature stitched together from multiple cadavers and brought to life by a mad scientist who dared to play God and paid the ultimate price for it. Mary didn't end up winning the competition because Byron thought her story was too philosophical and gave the win to Percy for his shitty story. But the legacy of Mary's tale would long outlive anything else written by anyone else in the villa that night. Mary would go on to take the story that she had written at just 18 years old and refine it, publishing her final work anonymously in 1818 at only 20 years old. So let's talk about that right now. Frankenstein begins as a story within a story. Captain Robert Walton is writing a series of letters to his sister Margaret as he sets sail to explore the North Pole. During his journey, the weather takes a turn for the worse, but not wanting to give up on his ambitions, Robert pushes onward. Eventually, his ship and crew become trapped in the ice and are forced to wait for it to thaw as their resources begin to dwindle. As they wait, Robert spots two figures in the distance chasing each other on dog sleds. The smaller of the two figures ends up collapsing while the larger figure disappears into the storm. Robert brings the collapsed man on board his ship and nurses him back to health, learning that the man is a Swiss scientist named Victor Frankenstein. And Robert is just absolutely smitten by him, gushing about him to his sister in his letters. But the good times don't last because as Robert and Victor become closer friends, Victor reveals why he was chasing that other figure and just who or what that other figure was. We now learn Victor's story. He is the eldest son of his father, Alphonse Frankenstein, and his father's child bride, Caroline. What? Yeah, so Victor's parents' backstory is both fucked up and completely unnecessary, unless you count Mary Shelley desperately and not so subtly trying to justify her and Percy's relationship within fiction as necessary. But that's not important. Victor has two younger brothers, Ernest, who's like 16, and William, who's like anywhere between 5 and 10. He also has an adopted sister, Elizabeth Lavenza, who he's also engaged to, and depending on which version of the story you're reading, she's also his cousin. Ew. Different times. But when Victor is 17 years old, his mother contracts scarlet fever from Elizabeth after nursing her back to health when she had it. Caroline dies from her illness, and this is what causes Victor to obsess over the idea of reanimating the dead. Once Victor is 18, he goes to the University of Ingolstadt in Germany, and for the next 2 years, he makes many great scientific discoveries, including the secret to creating life. And Victor very specifically says that he's not going to tell us what that secret is. Victor details his experiment gathering materials for his creature from cemeteries, dissection rooms, and slaughterhouses. Yeah, so the creature is part animal, little known fact, but he decides to make the creature massive, approximately 8 feet tall, because it'll make it easier to put together the more little intricate details of the human body. Victor assembles the creature together in his dorm apartment, which is very funny. Typical dorm activities, am I right? And this is the part of the book that a lot of people get wrong. You have no idea how severely it pisses me off to hear people say,
"Oh, did you know the creature was hot in the book? Like he was so sexy. He was such a hottie."
It's fucking wrong.
Victor did indeed make the creature with the intention of him being beautiful, but when the creature is actually animated, he describes him like this. His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful! Great God! His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of a lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness, but these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes that seemed almost of the same color as the dun-white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion and straight black lips. So sure, he's got good hair and teeth, but he's also got yellow, translucent, shriveled skin, sunken white eyes, black lips, oh yeah, and he's 8 feet tall. Sure, some of you monster fucking freaks might be like,
Ooh, I'd still find him sexy.
but don't you dare act like if you saw this guy coming at you in the woods at night, you wouldn't run away screaming. Just like Victor, who is so terrified of his creation that he decides to just go to sleep for the night. But when he wakes up to see the creature standing over him like, "Dad, I just threw up," Victor becomes so terrified he flees his dorm, wandering around the city for the rest of the night. When morning comes, Victor runs into his childhood best friend, Henry, who's come to tell him that he's also coming to university. However, he's more interested in the arts than the sciences. Henry is a sensitive soul. Victor is happy about this at first, but then remembers that his life actually sucks right now when Henry asks to see his apartment. Victor can't come up with a good enough excuse as to why he wouldn't show Henry his apartment, so they head on over there. The whole time, Victor is racked with anxiety about what Henry is going to see. However, when they arrive, Victor finds his front door open and the place empty. The creature has seemingly wandered off somewhere. Victor is so relieved by this discovery that he starts laughing maniacally and collapses from exhaustion. Victor then becomes severely ill, and Henry has to spend months nursing him back to health. Yes, months. Victor is a weak-ass bitch. And even before Victor has completely recovered, he gets a letter from his family calling him home because his youngest brother, William, has been murdered. When Victor returns home, he's told that the family's servant, Justine Moritz, has been arrested for William's murder. Authorities suspect her because she was found with a gold locket belonging to William. They theorize that she must have killed him to steal it, but this doesn't make sense to any of the Frankensteins. They brought Justine into their home when she was just a child. She grew up with them. If anything, she's more of a sister than a maid. She would never kill William. She loved him as if her own. So to get the truth, Victor and Elizabeth go to visit Justine in jail, where she tells them that she didn't kill William, but instead, this is her story. She was playing in the woods with William and Ernest one day when Ernest started yelling about how he lost William. The whole family began searching the woods, and Justine claims to have seen a demon, saying that the demon killed William and framed her. Elizabeth doesn't really believe the whole demon thing, but does believe that Justine is innocent and has been framed. Victor, on the other hand, does believe the demon thing, because he's pretty sure now that his creature killed his brother. But instead of sowing any level of reasonable doubt by saying something like, there was someone else with a motive to kill my brother, he decides to keep his mouth shut and let Justine hang for a crime she did not commit, just so that no one thinks he's crazy. What a tool. In his guilt, he goes on a hike in the woods, and who else does he run into other than the creature? Victor's obviously terrified, but the creature tells him to calm the fuck down. He just wants to talk because, yeah, he can talk now. Instead of being impressed by this, Victor acts like a little bitch and says he'd rather die than speak with him. Whatever. After a little more back and forth, the creature tells him his tale anyway. So now we enter a story within a story within a story as the creature tells us what led him here. He starts with the first night of his existence. After Victor ran out of the apartment, the creature saw the door was left open and wandered out, but not before putting clothes on to preserve his modesty. And hold on, pause. Please explain yourself, Mary. Because the way you describe the creature's early days implies that he has the mental capacity of a baby. Like, later, he burns his hand on fire because he thinks it's pretty and tries to pick it up. But you're telling me that he understands the concept of modesty? And to boot, Victor apparently has clothes just lying around that fit him? This 8-foot tall monster? Sure. But anyway, he goes wandering off into the woods and scares anyone he runs into. He also finds a cloak that he puts on for warmth, and I'm convinced at this point that Mary must have forgotten that she said he was 8 feet tall, because ain't no way that cloak would fit him. The creature continues to wander until he finds this old cabin and takes shelter in a little structure that leans against the cabin wall. After living there for a little while and listening to the family inside, he begins to learn their language and discovers that the family are the DeLacys and consist of a blind old man and his 2 adult children, Agatha and Felix. The whole family is very poor and sad, but that all changes when Felix is reunited with his wife, an Arabian woman named Safi. And it's pretty unclear why they were separated, something to do with Safi's father and politics, but they're back together now and everyone is happy. The creature decides that after a few months of living next to the family that he will finally introduce himself and wisely starts with the blind father. The old man is very welcoming and things are going good until the other family members return home and are horrified to see him, attacking him out of fear. The creature runs away, and when he comes back, he sees the family's cottage has been abandoned. Heartbroken, the creature goes back to wandering, where he's once again only greeted by fear and violence by any person he comes across, and his resentment for humanity continues to grow. This is when he comes across William, lost in the woods. His initial thought is he can take William as a son and raise him to not fear him, but William is a little shit and is like, "Do you know who I am? I'm a Frankenstein." And the creature is like, "Hold up, a Frankenstein? I know that name. That's the name of my deadbeat dad who left me for dead. And in a moment of rage, he strangles William to death, taking his locket and later slipping it into Justine's pocket to frame her. The creature ends his tale by saying that he's only the way he is due to loneliness, and that if Victor makes a wife for him, he'll run away with her to South America and Victor will never see them again. Feeling like he has no other choice, Victor agrees and begins constructing a wife, only to realize in the home stretch that this is maybe not a good idea. His main concerns are that 1, there's no guarantee that the wife will actually like the creature, and he might get stuck in this infinite loop of creating more and more creatures until they take over the world or whatever. Or 2, the wife might like the creature so much that they start procreating to the point where their offspring take over the world or whatever. And this has been said before, but the first concern is valid, but the second concern can easily be dealt with by just not giving the wife a uterus. Like, you're the one building this woman from scratch, Victor. Just don't give her a uterus. But either way, Victor decides to destroy the wife so neither of these scenarios can happen. The creature sees this and is, of course, pissed and vows revenge on Victor. Victor stupidly thinks the creature means that he's going to kill him and decides to spend a few days on a boat out on the ocean, only to return to discover his best friend Henry has been murdered. Victor is briefly apprehended for the crime, only to be released due to lack of evidence, and he returns home to marry Elizabeth. The creature had warned Victor that he would be with him on his wedding night, and once again, Victor stupidly assumes the creature means he's coming after him again, but instead, he kills Elizabeth. Due to all the murder happening, Victor's dad dies of a broken heart, and now Victor's whole family is dead. Except for Ernest. Remember Ernest? He's the middle child. Everyone always forgets about him. Typical. But having forgotten Ernest existed just like everyone else, Victor begins chasing the creature to get his revenge. And he chases the creature all the way up into the Arctic, leading us back to our framing device where Captain Robert Walton finds Victor. After hearing Victor's tale, Robert decides that pushing forward on his expedition is probably not a good idea and prepares to turn back. Victor, on the other hand, wants to keep chasing the creature but cannot due to his weakened state, and instead he dies. As the ship begins to return home, Robert discovers the creature on board, standing over Victor's body and lamenting their follies. He tells Robert that he plans to burn Victor's body and then throw himself upon the pyre as well. And with that, the creature takes Victor and walks off into the Arctic, never to be seen again. Overall, I very much enjoy this story because it's an excellent example of Gothic horror. The themes of hubris and the dramatic irony of it all is just chef's kiss. I will say, the writing style does often annoy me though, because it tends to be very long winded, giving us lots of little details that serve no purpose, and also no character has a distinct voice. Everyone talks the exact same way, and this isn't just my modern mind thinking this. This was a critique of the book when it was first published as well. But I'll forgive Mary for this because she was, after all, freaking 18 when she first started writing this. So, with that in mind, this book is freaking fantastic. The first ever adaptation of Frankenstein was made within Mary Shelley's lifetime. She even attended a showing with her father, writing favorably about it. This adaptation is Presumption, or The Fate of Frankenstein, a 3-act 1823 play written by Richard Brinsley Peake, an English playwright who is best known for this adaptation. And most famously, he's the one who wrote the infamous Victor Frankenstein line, "It lives." He's also the one who invented Frankenstein's hunchback assistant. However, although most people might know this character as Igor, he's named Fritz in this version. Some more important background information is that due to weird laws at the time, only certain playhouses were allowed to perform actual plays. Therefore, other production companies were only allowed to perform other types of live performances, such as burlesque, puppet theater, pantomimes, etc. For this reason, Presumption actually contained songs like a musical, and allegedly, the creature was made mute so that he could claim the show as a pantomime. However, this claim is disputed. The play follows the general plot of the novel, however, there are a few major differences, including a major abridgment of the plot and swap love interests. Victor and Agatha are love interests in this, and Henry and Elizabeth are engaged. So Victor isn't going to marry his own sister sister in this version. I call that a win. The creature is also called the hobgoblin or the demon in this play and is described as having blue skin and being 20 feet tall. That seems a little excessive. Overall, I think this was a perfectly decent adaptation, but it completely skips a lot of the central themes of the original text. Victor is never really portrayed as being in the wrong or the cause of everything that's happening. He's treated more like a victim of circumstance, and the play never really addresses his hubris. Also, it's worth mentioning that in the stage directions, it's implied that the hobgoblin might be romantically interested in Agatha, and that's the reason he's stalking her slash helping her family. But this is never explored very deeply or even followed up on. This is also the first time the creature is depicted as a nearly mindless monster that kills for seemingly no reason. And it's the first adaptation. It's only 1823 and it's already the beginning of the end. The next adaptation of Frankenstein would come over 50 years later in 1887. Frankenstein or the Vampire's Victim, also known as Frankenstein or the Model Man, yes, I know that's a lot of different names, was a parody burlesque musical written by Richard Butler and Henry Chance Newton with music by Meyer Lutz. This marks the first time we see a Frankenstein adaptation that is a comedy. Unfortunately, this show was critically panned and closed only after a week, making copies of the original show very difficult to find, at least for free. However, I did manage to find this excerpt from Roxana Stewart's book, Stage Blood Vampires of the 19th Century Stage, about the play. The Vampire's Victim was released amid a trend of lurid monster mashups created for the Victorian audience. The Vampire's Victim was described as a Christmas burlesque and was popular in its time. The play was a mashup of the popular literary characters Frankenstein's monster and the vampire. Notably, Dr. Frankenstein was a breeches role, played by a woman in men's clothing, a possible nod to the sexual confusion or queer themes surrounding Frankenstein's relationship with his fiancée, and his more intense relationship with the product of his life's work. The central problem presented in finding a mate for the creature, here shown as a sympathetic monster. One main problem is that he lacks a circulatory system, a byproduct of his inhuman nature. The presented mate is Mary Ann, a vampire. Her jealous vampire lover is one of several obstacles keeping Mary Ann apart from the bloodless and mateless creature. Additionally, the creature is drawn to Dr. Frankenstein's fiancée, Tarina, making star-crossed lovers out of most of the characters. The end of the play is wrapped up inexplicably by the images of dancing bears, one of whom is revealed to be the monster in disguise. He calls out for the sun goddess, who brings an end to the chaotic scene set on a pirate ship stuck on an iceberg. And there you have it. From what I could find, audiences didn't enjoy this show at the time because they thought it was too feminist. And honestly, in addition to its batshit crazy plot synopsis, this information just makes me want to read the script even more. But unfortunately, the only one I could find was only available to buy for £42 and I ain't made of money. Maybe one day I can become a big enough channel to start a Patreon and get donations for research, but until then, I'm gonna have to leave this one here. The last adaptation I want to talk about in this chapter is Peggy Webling's 1927 stage adaptation, Frankenstein: An Adventure in the Macabre. This adaptation is extremely influential in terms of Frankenstein adaptations for a few reasons. First, this play is the first time the creature is referred to as Frankenstein, a choice that still has repercussions to this day. Second is that Peggy's play would go on to serve as the basis for the most famous Frankenstein adaptation of all time, the 1931 Universal Pictures film, but more on that later. For now, let's discuss Peggy's play. After adapting her work, Peggy sent her manuscript to producer and actor Hamilton Dean. This name might be familiar to you because I also mentioned Hamilton in my Evolution of Dracula video because he was the man who brought Dracula to the stage and even gave him his iconic high-collared cape and tuxedo look. And because one gothic horror adaptation had brought him so much success, he decided to also produce Peggy's Frankenstein, and his production company toured both shows for the next 2 years, so theoretically, you could have been seeing Dracula and Frankenstein double feature in 1927 on the stage, and then a few years later, in 1931, you could see that same double feature on the screen. What a time to be alive. Peggy's Frankenstein received generally poor reviews from critics at the time, but audiences loved it. And while I wasn't able to find a copy of this play to read for myself, I did manage to find a plot synopsis from Stephen Earl Forey's book, Hideous Progenies, Dramatizations of Frankenstein from Mary Shelley to the Present. So according to Forey, Peggy's play goes like this. Dr. Frankenstein, yes, doctor. I suppose this also means that Peggy was the first to introduce Victor being a doctor instead of just a med student like he was in the book. But anyway, Dr. Frankenstein creates a creature in his own image, not using science but rather alchemy, creating an elixir of life. After the creature is born, the doctor, whose name is Henry instead of Victor in this version, names the creature Frankenstein after himself as a way of sort of inviting him into the family and claiming him as his own. And to avoid any confusion from this point forward, I will be exclusively calling the doctor Henry and the creature Frankenstein. But in this version, Henry has an ex-fiancée, Amelia, who cucked him by getting with Henry's best friend, Victor. Yeah, so to make things more confusing, Henry, who was named Victor in the book, has been name swapped with his friend Victor, who was named Henry in the book. Just go with it. But to make things even more messy, Frankenstein starts having feelings for Amelia too, and Amelia is also weirdly attracted to Frankenstein, and this is made even more weird by the fact that Frankenstein is described as being very childlike in cognition and reasoning. It's kind of ick. But the next thing that happens varies depending on which version of the play you're reading. Before rewrites, Frankenstein accidentally kills a little girl by drowning her and decides to live the rest of his life in exile as a form of self-punishment. But after rewrites of the play in 1930 by playwright John L. Balderston, who bought the rights for the play for American productions, Frankenstein instead demands Henry build him a wife. Henry begins to do this but is convinced to stop by one of his professors, Dr. Waldman. After Frankenstein finds out that Henry isn't going to make him a wife, Frankenstein kills him in a blind rage, but is afterwards very remorseful. Dr. Waldman suggests that Frankenstein should beg God for forgiveness, and Frankenstein yells, "God help me!" After which, he is struck dead by lightning, so either that's some crazy coincidence timing, or a crazy overreaction from God. It's worth noting, however, that while Balderson did make official rewrites to the show, he never actually went on to produce it, probably because he hated Peggy's original play so goddamn much, calling it crude and illiterate. Damn, dude. If you hated it so much, why did you buy it? And a bit of an aside here, but Balderson was also the man who bought the American stage rights to Dean's Dracula and brought it to Broadway. So that's another link between Frankenstein and Dracula. But anyway, based on this plot synopsis, I can see why critics didn't really like this one. Just like previous adaptations, it glosses over the central themes of the book in favor of just making something scary. And to address the Henry Victor name swap in a little more detail, I couldn't really find an answer. I found a couple articles saying that the name swap was due to the name Victor sounding too harsh for Western audiences, but this is mostly attributed to the 1931 film instead of this play, which doesn't make sense because this one came first. So honestly, the jury's out, sorry. But that concludes our early stage adaptations. So now let's move to the screen. The first ever screen adaptation of Frankenstein was the 1910 silent film of the same name produced by Edison Studios. This film was written and directed by J. Searle Dawley and starred Mary Fuller as Elizabeth, Augustus Phillips as Frankenstein, and Charles Stanton Ogle as the monster. The film starts by calling itself a liberal adaptation, meaning that they tried their best to make it as palatable as possible for general audiences by taking out as much of the horrific aspects as they could manage. But I don't think they succeeded because this film has one of the most disturbing creature-making scenes I've seen in any adaptation. Once again, Victor uses alchemy instead of science to create his creature, making him by dumping a bunch of shit into a big cauldron until a man forms in the pot. The filmmakers achieved this effect by burning a string puppet and then playing the footage in reverse. And I don't know, it's not gory, but there's something deeply disturbing about it. But another change from the novel is that the creature is once again depicted as being pure evil with no rhyme or reason. And in fact, he's so evil that just witnessing Victor and Elizabeth's pure-hearted love is enough to repel him. And the most distinct change is that it's revealed that the creature wasn't truly real, but rather a manifestation of Victor's more evil side, which is honestly pretty interesting and not something I've seen done before. Overall, I thought this one was alright. They did what they could with a 12-minute runtime, and I like the look of the creature. This is also the first time where the creature is a metaphor for Victor's inner evil rather than a literal monster, so that's a pretty cool concept. But other than that, this adaptation was pretty shallow, and once again absolved Frankenstein of any wrongdoing while portraying the creature as nothing but an evil monster. Between the 1910 film and the next notable adaptation of the 1931 film, there were two other Frankenstein films: Life Without a Soul, a 1915 American feature-length film, and Il Monstro di Frankenstein, a 1921 Italian short film. Both are unfortunately considered lost films, having no or only small portions of their footage remaining today. While very little is known about either of these adaptations, I felt like it'd be a disservice to skip over them without mentioning. That being said, now that we've paid our respects, let's talk about the real gem of this video, the 1931 Universal Pictures film Frankenstein. Directed by James Whale and starring Colin Clive as Henry Frankenstein, Mae Clarke as Elizabeth, and Boris Karloff as the monster. However, I will note that in the opening credits of the film, the monster is credited as being played by question mark, as like a little fun, uh-oh, is the monster really an actor or is it a real monster kind of thing. And playing into the kind of fun gimmick horror thing James Whale was gunning for, the movie starts with a warning to the audience delivered by Edward Van Sloan, who plays Dr. Waldman in this film. Van Sloan is a classic Universal horror actor, having also played Dr. Van Helsing in Universal's Dracula and Dr. Sid Muller in The Mummy. The guy was known for being horror movie doctors. What can I say? He looked the part. But anyway, Dr. Waldman gives a meta warning to the audience, telling us that the Universal Pictures owner, Carl Lammel, thought it was best you should know the story you are about to see is very frightening, and if you think you can't handle it, you should leave, or...
So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now is your chance to, well, we've warned you.
Anyway, they warned you. This film is responsible for so much of the iconic imagery we associate with Frankenstein. It's also where we get this iconic line reading. It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! As far as I can tell in my research, this film marks the first time we see electricity as the secret to life, or at least visually. It's a little more complicated than that. You see, the idea of electricity being the secret spark didn't come from nowhere. In fact, the origins of electricity bringing the creature to life can debatably be traced back to the original novel. Because while Victor did not specifically state what the secret to life was, he does mention on several occasions being enraptured by the idea of electricity and galvanism. But either way, this is the first time that electricity is explicitly confirmed as the creature's source of life, and that's the main mythos we'll see recreated time and time again in other adaptations and throughout pop culture. And I also just want to point out this scene where the creature just ragdolls Henry's body. Old movies, man. Gotta love them. This film has got a chokehold on the general public's idea of what Frankenstein is. It's responsible for most modern depictions of the creature as this mindless, shambling, killing machine with green skin, a square forehead, stitches in his skin, and bolts in his neck. And while it's not the first adaptation to depict these elements, it's also responsible for our association with Frankenstein being a mad scientist with a hunchback assistant, and of course the dark and stormy night that brings with it the life-giving lightning. This adaptation holds a special place in my heart. I do love a mad scientist character and an insane cackle or two. But this film feels more like its own thing rather than an adaptation of Frankenstein. Once again, most of the nuance and themes of the original story are lost, and for a long time, we never really get them back. But the evolution does get more fun. Next in the lineup is Frankenstein's sillier sequel, 1935's Bride of Frankenstein. But despite its at times less than serious tone, Bride of Frankenstein is considered James Whale's magnum opus and has since been preserved in the Library of Congress as a historically and culturally significant film. Most of the main cast returns to reprise their roles, however, the original Elizabeth May Clark has been replaced by actress Valerie Hobson, who had to take over the role after May was unable to due to sickness. Bride of Frankenstein is the first adaptation to employ the use of a framing device, just as in the original novel. However, instead of Captain Robert Walton, we have Mary Shelley herself, in a revisionist version of The Vacation at Lake Geneva. But this film has some pretty iconic imagery in and of itself. Just look at the bride. Ugh, diva. And this design pretty much carries over to all bride designs you'll see in any adaptation that includes her. The bride, credited as the monster's mate, was played by Elsa Lancaster, the same actress who plays Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley in the opening scene. However, just like Boris Karloff in the first film, Elsa's name was replaced by a question mark in the credits, once again for the spook factor. Okay, but before I get into my review of this film, we have to address the elephant in the room. And that's the innate homosexual undertones of Frankenstein. Since the beginning, there has been something a little fruity going on with both Victor and the creature. Not necessarily with each other, because that gets a little murky with the whole father-son-ish dynamic they have. However, it's not a totally wrong reading. Like, what's gayer than being obsessed with your self-proclaimed adversary? But anyway, there are some popular gay readings I've seen for both characters. For Victor, although he is engaged to Elizabeth, he seems to have a much deeper and intimate relationship with his friend Henry, who himself isn't very interested in women and constantly vies for Victor's attention and approval. And Victor, in turn, notes in the novel that Henry has been the only person to really be able to calm him down when he goes into his violent fits of rage, a trait I also haven't seen adapted before. But anyway, their feelings towards one another do kind of give off a more than friends vibe. With Victor, his interpretation of queerness comes from his interactions with people in his life. The creature's queerness, on the other hand, comes from the lack of them. He is othered, he is rejected by everyone in his life, even by his own family. And even when he starts to believe he has a sense of community, that too is ripped away from him when others are able to see him for what he really is. This is a feeling a lot of queer people can relate to, and I go more in depth between the love of monsters and gay people in this video, but this is the speedrun explanation. So why am I bringing this up now in arguably the straightest adaptation of Frankenstein? After all, both Frankenstein and the monster are given female love interests in this film. But that's where you're wrong, because on the surface, this might look like the straightest adaptation, but it's actually the gayest. Let's start with the director, James Whale. James was an out gay man at a time where being one was practically unheard of, but he didn't shy away from this fact of himself. He was out and proud. And while it may or may not have been evident in his work, there's a lot of scholarly back and forth about it, you can make a case that his identity did become a part of the films he made, the most famous of which being Bride of Frankenstein. There's also the fact that one or two of the actors in Bride may have been gay as well. Ernest Thesiger, who played the character Dr. Pretorius, was also a gay man. And rumor has it that Colin Clive, Henry Frankenstein's actor, may have been bisexual. However, this is heavily contested. But just having gay people in a film does not a gay film make. So what's really gay about Bride of Frankenstein? Well, first off, it's camp. Bride is filled with both intentional and unintentional camp, and we all know gay people live for camp. Any regular film can become an instant gay classic simply by being camp. Because even if unintentional or created by a non-queer person, camp is still inherently linked to the gay aesthetic. Camp is one of the main reasons gays love B-horror so much. At least, it's my reason. But camp isn't the only reason, and it's far from the main reason that Bride is considered a gay classic. So let's take a closer look. First is the obvious connection between the monster as a misunderstood outsider and the connection queer people can make to that and their own lives. But that one's apparent, so let's look at some less obvious ones, like the relationships in this film. And I'm not talking about Elizabeth and the bride. In fact, the women in this film aren't very present, and instead we focus on the relationships between the male characters. Let's look at Dr. Pretorius and Henry's relationship first. While it obviously isn't lovey-dovey or intimate in any traditional way, they still have the innate intimacy of creating life together. That life being a woman who is repulsed by the idea of being with a man. Two gay dads and a lesbian daughter, if you will. And even before that happens, Dr. Pretorius propositions Henry in an almost seductive way, taking him into a moonlit room, enticing him with the idea of procreation. And then there's Dr. Pretorius himself. Dr. Pretorius is kind of a fruity character. The way he talks and carries himself lends to a more feminine quality rather than a traditionally masculine one. And speaking on this, let's also examine how Henry carries himself. Henry, while not as flaming as someone like Dr. Pretorius, isn't exactly a typical macho man either. While most manly men main characters will resort to stoicism to show how manly they are, Henry is the exact opposite. He lets his emotions rule him. He's excitable. He often becomes manic when he's happy and hysterical when he's upset. He's also known to have a pretty weak, perhaps womanly constitution. When he becomes too overwhelmed or scared, he's constantly passing out or becoming ill, perhaps catching a case of the vapors. Not to mention, he's never the manly macho hero of the story. If anything, he's often the damsel in distress character, either being saved by someone else or being saved by dumb luck. No big redeeming hero moment for him. Okay, but what about Elizabeth? He's engaged to a woman. Yeah, but like, have you ever actually seen him show that he even likes her? A beard if I ever saw one. No, but seriously, there is a distinct lack of intimacy between them. There's a lack of intimacy between any male and female pairs for that matter. I don't think we ever even see them kiss or say, "I love you." But let's talk about Elizabeth's role in the queer reading of Bride. During the film, she and Henry get married off screen, but before Henry can prove that he's straight by consummating their marriage, he's stopped by Dr. Pretorius and the monster, who kidnap Elizabeth, forcing Henry to instead procreate with them, two men. Gay! And speaking of the monster, let's discuss his queer reading. The isolation we've already been over, so let's discuss his relationships. The first close relationship we ever see him engage in is with another man, the blind old hermit. And although we never see them engage romantically, it is interesting to note that he calls the blind man his friend, and when he sees the bride, he also calls her his friend. Using the same term for both people does certainly raise some eyebrows, and I think you could either interpret this as the monster being asexual or bisexual.
Whoa, he's bisexual! I didn't know that!
By the way, I'm bisexual!
Not to mention, Dr. Pretorius also draws the monster into his little plan using the same seductive reasoning he used on Henry. That saucy little Manx. But hey, it worked, didn't it? Whether this queer context was intentional or not, it really doesn't matter. What matters is that gay people saw themselves in this movie, and whether scholars like it or not, this is a gay camp classic now. Perhaps it was even the first gay camp classic to ever exist. Alright, I'm gonna leave this analysis here. I know I've only touched the tip of the iceberg when it comes to this film. I mean, I didn't even talk about all the religious imagery used, but I don't want to make this video any longer than it already is. And I also need to stay focused. This video is supposed to be about how these characters have evolved over time, not about how they may be allegories for Jesus Christ. So with that, my final thoughts. I love this movie. It's iconic. It's the moment. I love how it fixed some of my issues I had with the previous film, showing the monster as a more compassionate and sympathetic figure, and allowing him to be able to speak. That was nice. Let's see how his character evolved from here. After the commercial success of the first two Frankenstein films, Universal Pictures knew they needed to cash in on the success of the monster, and they would monetize his suffering at any cost. That cost being artistic integrity. But we haven't fully entered the suffering game quite yet, because next up in the Universal Frankenstein series is Son of Frankenstein, widely regarded as the last of the great Universal Frankenstein films. Son of Frankenstein was directed by Rowland V. Lee. James Whale no longer worked for Universal by this time, his contract having expired. It's hotly debated why James didn't have his contract renewed. Some say it was because he was openly gay and Universal didn't like that, but others say it had nothing to do with that, and it really came down to creative differences and disagreements regarding censorship due to the looming threat of the Hays Code. Whatever it was, James no longer worked for Universal, and Rowland took over as director. The beginning of the end, it seems. Boris Karloff returns as the monster in this film. Basil Rathbone plays Baron Wolf von Frankenstein, Henry Frankenstein's son, and Bela Lugosi stars as the main villain of this movie, an evil hermit named Igor. Yay! Bela Lugosi is here! And believe me, you'll be seeing plenty of him for a hot second. But just a quick side note about Igor. First of all, his name is spelled with a Y, not an I, so that's an important distinction. And while he's not technically Frankenstein's lab assistant in this film, he does assist Dr. Frankenstein in the lab, helping him to revive the creature. So this may be the origin of how Frankenstein's hunchback assistant became associated with the name Igor. Maybe as a kind of Mandela effect, where people got this movie and the first Frankenstein film mixed up in their heads and thought the assistant's name was Igor instead of Fritz. IDK, the origins are a bit murky, but we'll discuss it a little more later. Not gonna lie, I enjoyed this one far more than I thought I would. There was a distinct lack of camp in this film, just from the fact that it is a different director. Son definitely is taking itself more seriously, but I did really enjoy this more serious tone. I know this character isn't technically Victor, but he is a Frankenstein, so I'm still going to dissect him a bit. I loved his motivation. It made a lot of sense for him to want to bring back the creature as a way of trying to redeem his father's reputation. It didn't feel forced or contrived like later films we'll look at, and I honestly found him pretty endearing as a character. He was pretty baby girl coded. And because he's not Victor, I'm willing to forgive the more sympathetic narrative surrounding him. As for the monster, honestly, this is where the story felt like it was lacking. The monster wasn't so much a character as he was a plot device. We never really see him have a personality other than that one moment in the lab where he's touching up on Wolf all homoerotically and silently asking him why the fuck he brought him back to life. Speaking of which, he's even lost his ability to speak in this film. And this film had a pretty good setup to give the creature more depth because Igor has this hypnotic power over the creature and forces him to kill people. And it's really a shame because I feel like they could have made quite a good commentary on how Igor uses the creature for his own gain while simultaneously making him believe he is his only friend in the world. It could have been a wonderful look at abusive and manipulative relationships, specifically the kind where the abuser makes you feel isolated and makes you do bad things against your will because you feel like you have no other choice. It would be very interesting to see an adaptation where they explored this more, but unfortunately, this was not that adaptation. We begin to see the beginning of the end here with the next Universal Frankenstein film, The Ghost of Frankenstein, released in 1942 and directed by yet another director, Earl C. Kenton. Bela Lugosi returns, reprising his role as Igor. However, we get another new Frankenstein in this film, Ludwig Frankenstein, the brother of Wolf. And most regrettably, Boris Karloff has been recast, this time the role of the monster being played by Lon Chaney Jr., most famous for playing Universal's Wolfman. This one received mixed reviews, with some critics saying it was just as good as Son of Frankenstein and other critics saying it was the worst slop they've ever seen, and I think it's somewhere in the middle. I certainly don't think this one is as good as Son. The plot is often contrived and confused, especially with how we're supposed to feel about the monster, and the characters all lack depth of any kind. That being said, it was at least still entertaining in some ways, and while they may not have been followed through on, the film had some interesting ideas and themes. But with that in mind, Dr. Frankenstein and the monster felt more like stock characters than actual adaptations from the book or even characters of their own. The following year, in 1943, we got our first Universal crossover film with Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. They were running out of ideas, I fear. And we still have 3 more films to go in this chapter. We once again switched directors, a great sign, with Roy William Neill directing this one. Lon Chaney Jr. and Bela Lugosi are back, but confusingly, they've shuffled around the roles. Lon is back to playing the Wolfman, and now Bela is playing the monster. And knowing this does break my heart, because Bela had been asked to play the monster from the beginning, but refused to play such a mindless, shambling character. So the fact that he's finally playing him now suggests that he was broken down and most likely in financial need due to his drug addiction. It's all just so sad. So let's discuss this slop. Yeah, so this one wasn't very well received. The monster and the Wolfman didn't even really interact that much. Very disappointing. Not to mention, there are a lot of obvious continuity errors between this film and the last movie, but it was most disappointing to see the monster once again relegated to the mindless monster role after regaining the ability to speak in the last film, even if it was for roundabout reasons. So basically what happened is that Igor put his brain into the monster. Never mind, it sounds really dumb when I explain it out loud. It was nice to see a different kind of Frankenstein in this film, though. Her name is Elsa, and she's the granddaughter of Henry. We've never had a girl Frankenstein as our main Frank, even if she ultimately didn't do much. So if you watched my Evolution of Dracula video, I've actually already covered this one, but only on a very surface level and from a strictly Dracula perspective. So don't worry, if you've already watched my other video, I won't be repeating myself. Earl C. Kenton is back directing this one, and Boris Karloff is back, but not as the monster, but rather a mad scientist. But the monster is played by some bitch named Glenn Strange. Cool name though. The monster is a very shallow character in this. However, I can appreciate the fact that he isn't depicted completely mindless and senselessly violent, as it's clear he cares about Boris Karloff's character, Dr. Neiman, and chooses to save him even at the cost of his own life at the end of the film. I just wish the Frankenstein part of the Frankenstein adaptations would come back. Where the hell is Victor? You guys aren't gonna believe this, but I also already covered this one in my Dracula video. But I didn't really talk about the monster in that one, so let's do it now. It should be quick. He's got like 5 minutes of screen time in this one. Earl C. Kenton is still holding on to that director's chair for this one, and Glenn Strange is still the monster. He's kind of in a coma and remains that way for most of the film, and when he does wake up, he just dies again until they need him again for the next movie. There isn't really much I can say about this other than I've never seen the monster portrayed with so little depth. Oh, and also, this is the only film I've seen with a female Igor-like character, so that's cool. But Victor is still gone. Can you believe to learn? I also already mentioned this one in my Dracula video. IDK guys, maybe you should go watch that one if you haven't. But anyway, Abbott and Costello were this comedy duo akin to the Three Stooges who did a lot of slapstick comedy and always got themselves into crazy situations. And in this case, that meant getting caught up with Dracula, the monster, and the Wolfman. This film was directed by Charles Barton, and Glenn Strange is still the monster. But the monster is barely in this one, and at the end, he's once again burned to death. Poor guy can't catch a break. Oh, also there's a cameo from The Invisible Man.
Allow me to introduce myself. I'm the Invisible Man.
But like I mentioned in my Dracula video, despite being a comedy, I didn't really find this one very funny, other than that one chase scene. And to boot, the monster is once again an emotionless, mindless killing machine. And Victor still isn't here. But with this film, we've come to the end of our Universal era, and we can now move on to more modern interpretations. But before we do that, let's hear from this video's sponsor. Me. That's right, me. Because who else is going to talk to you for hours on end about the slight variations of Frankenstein media? And I heard if you subscribe to my channel, you too can unlock the secret of life and build your own murderous soft boy. So if you want to spit in God's face and commit the ultimate act of hubris, please give me a like and subscribe, and go check out my various social medias linked in the description below. Thank you. And back to the video. Following Following the less than serious bout of sequel slop from Universal, Hammer Film Productions took their own stab at making a series of Frankenstein adaptations, the first of which was The Curse of Frankenstein, released in 1957. There are 7 Hammer Frankenstein films in total, and as much as I'd love to cover all of them, I'm only going to cover the first film in detail. However, who knows, maybe I'll cover the sequels in another video. Let me know in the comments if you're interested. The Curse of Frankenstein has a much darker and serious tone than the Universal films, and even than the original novel. I've even read that some people consider it the darkest and most grotesque adaptation to date. Directed by Terence Fisher, the film stars Peter Cushing as Victor Frankenstein and Christopher Lee as the Creature. And this was the last time this team would come together, as the next year, in 1958, Terence Fisher would direct the Hammer Film Productions' Dracula, starring Peter Cushing as Dr. Van Helsing and Christopher Lee as Dracula. Once again, I did talk about that one in my Evolution of Dracula video if you want to check it out or whatever. But anyway, let's discuss this film. It vaguely follows the plot of the novel, but there are some pretty notable differences. Like, the framing device is present, but it's Victor telling his life story to a priest as he sits in a prison for crimes unspecified, but I'm sure you can take a wild guess. Victor has this live-in tutor named Paul with whom he has a homoerotic relationship, ooh, but he's also banging his maid Justine behind Elizabeth's back, who is both his fiancée and cousin in this version. Ooh. But at least she's also not his sister, I guess. Victor is also a murdering asshole in this version, killing people to collect only the finest body parts for his creature. After watching this, I can see why it was credited as the most gory Frankenstein adaptation. I bet that was definitely true for its time, just like when people say The Exorcist is the scariest movie ever made. However, I think that it's far from true by today's standards. While this one isn't very book accurate in terms of plot, it is interesting in terms of characterization, at least when it comes to Victor. It was so nice and refreshing to see a Victor who wasn't played as the misguided hero or the victim of a tragic tale, but for what he really is, a crazy, arrogant piece of shit who shows no responsibility or remorse. It's not often you see an adaptation willing to accurately depict Victor because of how unsympathetic he is. And honestly, I love that they made him worse. And it was also a nice added touch that he got a sort of comeuppance at the end instead of just copping out and dying. However, it was very disappointing to see the creature still be a shambling, murderous nothing, but at least we got a great Victor. Okay, so a bit of personal backstory here. Young Frankenstein has been one of my favorite films since I was basically a toddler. When I was around 5 years old, my sister and I would watch this movie on repeat to the point where we could recite all the lines by heart. And I low-key still can recite all the lines by heart. Young Frankenstein is by no means the first time Frankenstein was adapted into a comedy. Just look at that one panned Christmas burlesque, or Abbott and Costello, or even shows like The Munsters and Scooby-Doo. But I would argue that Young Frankenstein is the most significant and culturally relevant comedic Frankenstein adaptation. It not only stands the test of time, but it also made its own impact on public perceptions of the story. Most notably, you could argue this film was the final nail in the coffin for associating Dr. Frankenstein with having a hunchback assistant named Igor. Although there is a joke where he says it's actually pronounced Igor, but only in response to Frederick saying his last name is pronounced Frankenstein.
Frankenstein.
You're putting me on.
No, it's pronounced Frankenstein.
Do you also say Froderick?
No, Frederick.
Well, why isn't it Froderick Frankenstein?
It isn't. It's Frederick Frankenstein.
I see.
You must be Igor.
No, it's pronounced Igor.
But they told me it was Igor.
Well, they were wrong then, weren't they?
But regardless, that's how they pronounce his name for the rest of the movie. This film is also a parody of the first 3 Universal Frankenstein films, but I think it takes most inspiration from Son of Frankenstein, especially since both have an inspector with a wooden arm. Young Frankenstein was directed by comic legend Mel Brooks, who is insanely still alive at 99 years old. He'll turn 100 next year in June. A hardy bitch. Snaps for him. Mel co-wrote the script for Young Frankenstein with another comic legend, Gene Wilder, who also starred as this film's Dr. Frankenstein. The cast was rounded out with Peter Boyle as the monster, Marty Feldman as Igor, Terry Garr as Inga, and Madeline Kahn as Elizabeth. All extremely funny people in their own rights. There are so many funny gags in this movie. Walk this way.
Walk this way. This way.
Werewolf.
Werewolf.
Werewolf?
There. What? There, wolf. There, castle.
Why are you talking that way?
I thought you wanted to.
No, I don't want to.
Suit yourself. I'm easy.
The hump that keeps switching sides.
Didn't you used to have that on the other side?
What?
Your, Oh, never mind.
Freaking Abby Normal.
Would you mind telling me whose brain I did put in?
And you won't be angry?
I will not be angry.
Abby someone.
Abby someone. Abby who?
Abby normal.
The whole blind man scene.
A visitor is all I ask. A temporary companion to help me pass a few short hours in my lonely life. Thank you, Lord.
And not technically a gag, but that freaking speech Gene Wilder gives.
From that fateful day when stinking bits of slime first crawled from the sea and shouted to the cold stars, I am man. Our greatest dread has always been the knowledge of our own mortality. But tonight, we shall hurl the gauntlet of science into the frightful face of death itself. Tonight, we shall ascend into the heavens. We shall mock the earthquake. We shall command the thunders and penetrate into the very womb of impervious nature herself.
Ugh. Perfection. I'm not gonna lie, this one was more of a self-indulgent addition to this video. I don't really have much analysis or introspection to add here. It's just fun. It's so much fun, and it's nice to see everyone having fun. And you know what? It's also nice to see everyone get a happy ending. That's something you don't often see in Frankenstein adaptations. Seriously, check this one out if you haven't already seen it. Play us out, Igor! Another one of my favorite adaptations is 1990's Frankenhooker. Frankenhooker is a black satirical comedy of Frankenstein that is as outrageous as it is entertaining. Directed and co-written by Frank Henenlotter, it stars James Lawrence as Jeffrey Franken, this film's Victor Frankenstein stand-in, and Patty Mullen as his fiancée Elizabeth, who was also later transformed into this film's creature. It's important to note that while adaptations where the creature is female are few and far between, Frankenhooker was not the first to do it. You could argue that Bride of Frankenstein was the first film to depict a female creature. However, I would argue that this was a separate creation and not the creature himself. There was also one of the Hammer Film Productions Frankenstein sequel films, Frankenstein Created Woman, 1967, in which the doctor brings a dead woman back to life by putting the brain of her male lover in her body. We don't have time to unpack all that, but this is arguably another female creature. So depending on how you want to look at it, Frankenhooker is only the third-ish film in the history of Frankenstein films to have a female creature. So what I'm saying is we need more. Get on that, make it snappy. But this film tells the story of Jeffrey Franken, who brings his girlfriend Elizabeth back to life after she's tragically killed in a freak lawnmower accident. But you see, Elizabeth didn't really have the perfect body before she died, so Jeffrey decides to source new parts from more hot and sexy sex workers. At first, Elizabeth is happy to be alive again and cheers on Jeffrey's medical achievement, until she realizes what Jeffrey's done to her. Jeffrey didn't bring her back as she was, but as how he wanted her to be. And not only that, but he exploited and used other women in the process, dehumanizing them and Elizabeth. Jeffrey is decapitated at the end of the film, and Elizabeth gets some poetic justice on him, bringing him back to life by giving him the body of a woman. Elizabeth mocks him, throwing his words back in his face as he realizes he's stuck in a body that he would have found attractive on a woman, but now finds horrific on himself.
But hey, you look great, and you're alive. And you're back with me, and I love you. I love you, Jeffrey, and we're together again, all of us. Together again.
God, I love this movie. And not even as a Frankenstein adaptation, but just as a movie. It's very silly, sure, but it serves as such a great piece of feminist media. Okay, but let's look at it from an adaptation standpoint. Nitpicky, but it really pisses me off that they named him Jeffrey instead of Victor. Like, what was stopping them? There wasn't any reason not to name him Victor. But other than that, Jeffrey is a great character. I love that on the surface he might come off as the misguided hero trope, but really he is the arrogant, self-serving asshole like he is in the book, thinking only about what he can do and not what he should do. He's also the nice guy trope. You think it's so selfless of him to do whatever it takes to bring his lost love back, but he's not really doing it for her. He's doing it for him. He never even stops to consider what she would want, only what he wants, what would make him happy. Not to mention, he only views the other women as parts and not as people. And I love the Elizabeth creature combo in this movie. We've really never gotten a film up until now where the creature is able to get truly satisfying revenge on Victor. And I know it's because it's besides the point, but God, do I love it in this movie. It's so poetic. It's also always an interesting twist in the story where the creature is able to eventually remember their past life before their rebirth. It may not have been something explored in the book, but it certainly is a question many Frankenstein fans have pondered over the years. Not to mention the layered element of Frankenstein bringing someone he actually cares about back from the dead rather than just building an entirely new person, even if he does try to ignore her bodily autonomy for his own selfish desires. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is a bold title for this film as it falls into the same vein as Bram Stoker's Dracula, especially since both were produced by my arch nemesis Francis Ford Coppola. But unlike Bram Stoker's Dracula, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was not directed by Coppola. Instead, this film was directed by Kenneth Branagh, who also stars as this film's Victor Frankenstein. And this cast is pretty crazy because the creature, who's called the Creation in this adaptation, is played by Robert De Niro, and Elizabeth is played by Helena Bonham Carter. So I'm very interested to see how this is gonna look. The film got mostly mixed to poor reviews, so that doesn't bode well. So this was a bad movie. But I gotta say, it didn't piss me off as much as Bram Stoker's Dracula, simply because at least most people agree with me that this was a bad movie. But why was it a bad movie? Because it was probably one of the most book-accurate adaptations we've seen so far, so why was this bad when the book was good? Well, a few reasons. Number one is the tone. This movie wanted so bad to be dark, edgy, and badass that it forgot it was supposed to be gothic, and more often than not, it just came off as ridiculous. They made it excessively gory to the point where it just became comical how much blood there was. There was also this scene where I'm not really sure how I'm supposed to feel, but like the creature who is completely butt-ass naked and Victor are just slipping around on the floor for like 30 seconds straight. What was up with that? Also, the creature roars like a beast and kills dogs. He's also got some rapey vibes at certain points. It's all just so Ugh. But speaking on that, the second thing wrong is the characterizations. The film really wanted to have its cake and eat it too when it came to the characters, especially the creature. They wanted you to feel sympathy for the creature, but at the same time, they wanted you to root against him so that Victor could be the hero. And it just doesn't work like that, at least not in this version of the story, when they did so much heavy lifting to make the creature irredeemable by giving him, like, rapey vibes and shit. And then, when looking at Victor, they did my least favorite adaptation trope with his character by basically absolving him of any responsibility and making him the misguided genius as if none of this was his fault. But then, they try to have the same message as the book. It really just comes down to bad writing, and this was a bad adaptation. So this one has been buzzing in people's radars lately because of how absurd the lore of this production is. So in case you're unaware, in 2004, Hallmark, yes, Hallmark, the same company that made this, and this made this a Frankenstein miniseries. And not just any Frankenstein miniseries, but supposedly one of the most accurate adaptations of the Frankenstein novel to date. Hallmark did this. The miniseries consists of 2 hour-and-a-half-long episodes, both directed by Kevin Connor. The show stars Alec Newman as Victor Frankenstein, Luke Gross as the creature, and Donald Sutherland as Captain Robert Walton. Really wasn't expecting Hallmark to have such a pull, so color me surprised. So there's a few things I want to address in this one. First is the quote, "Only God can create life." This is a sentiment that is constantly repeated through the show, and I just want to point out how stupid it is. It's clearly trying to mimic the book's message about how no one should try to play God, but the wording just makes the message sound stupid. Like, it's literally factually wrong that only God can create life. In fact, most people can create life. Just give them around 7 to 9 months and I promise you'll get results. Second thing is something that I feel has been a folly of every adaptation I've seen so far, and it's the scene where the DeLacy family chases the creature out of their house. Because the creature is played by a normal human person in all of these adaptations, he never really looks monstrous enough to warrant this kind of extreme reaction from the family. And so these scenes end up feeling forced because the family looks like they're behaving extremely erratically and irrationally to seeing a man with like slightly wrinkled skin or some scars on his face. Like I said, it's not an issue confined to this adaptation. I just felt I had to point it out since this is the last time it happens in the adaptations I'm covering. This one is probably the most book accurate one we've looked at so far, but it still falls into the common follies we see with most of the other accurate adaptations. Those being wanting to have their cake and eat it too. They want you to fear the creature but also feel bad for him. They want you to realize that Victor's ambition was misguided but refuse to hold him accountable. They want you to root for Victor but also root for the creature, and by doing this, you're left with a jumbled mess. The book succeeds because it doesn't push you to root for anyone. It presents the story as a cautionary tale. It warns you to not make the same mistakes as its titular characters, and that's it. Where this adaptation and other book accurate adaptations before it fail is trying to get someone to be the hero, when the point of this story is to not have one. Okay, mini rant over. Overall, I thought this one was perfectly decent. It certainly was book accurate while sprinkling its own flavor in there sometimes, and that was nice to see, even if it didn't end up working on screen. It didn't end up doing anything spectacular, but it also wasn't the worst I've seen.
His name is Frankenstein.
Come on. You know me, you know I had to cover this one. Frankenstein the Musical is an off-Broadway adaptation that premiered in 2007. And funny enough, that same year, the Young Frankenstein musical debuted on Broadway. But I've listened to the album for this musical probably 100 times now, but it wasn't until I was researching for this video that I realized just how incredible the cast is. Hunter Foster plays Victor, and if you don't know him, he originated the role of Bobby Strong in Urinetown, another one of my favorites that I've probably listened to a million times over. I can't unhear it now, but somehow I didn't notice that they were the same guy before this point. We've also got Steve Blanchard playing the creature, who is best known for playing the Beast in Broadway's Beauty and the Beast, so He seems a little typecast. And rounding us off, we have Christine Knoll playing Elizabeth. And you might remember her name if you watched my Jekyll and Hyde deep dive video, because she originated the role of Emma in Jekyll and Hyde the musical. And I'm not gonna lie, guys, finding this out left me gagged. But what might gag you is finding out that this musical is probably the most book-accurate adaptation of Frankenstein to ever exist. So let's discuss. I want to start out not by pointing out a difference, but a similarity to the book that I haven't seen any other adaptation do. And that's set up the story as a series of letters Robert is writing to his sister, Margaret. It also establishes the year as 1793, which is by far the most book-accurate time period, as Mary set her story vaguely in the 1790s, despite the book itself being published in the 18-teens. So this adaptation still isn't one-to-one with the book, but I feel like it's the only adaptation we've seen so far to not only nail the characterization, but the themes as well. This is what I've been looking for. This is the only adaptation that's actually done it. But I appreciate that they changed the ending a bit to have Victor apologize to the creature for being a shitty dad. I think it's a more powerful ending that makes the tragedy of the story so much more potent. And the music slaps to boot. Seriously, you should check this one out. It's entirely sung through, so you don't even need to read a plot synopsis or see it in person to follow the story. Good soup. Okay, so I want to start by saying this isn't the worst Frankenstein movie out there, but... Okay, but seriously, this film has a great premise. It's a modern retelling of Frankenstein about an ex-soldier struggling with PTSD, and instead of going to therapy, he tries to make himself feel better by proving that death isn't the end. Like, that sounds super interesting, and it's what drew me to this film in the first place, but... Okay, before we get into that, let's talk about the background. Depraved is a 2019 film that was written, produced, and directed by Larry Fessenden. It stars David Call as Henry, this film's Victor Frankenstein stand-in, and Alex Barreau as Adam, the name given to the creature. And a bit of a side note here, there's this scene in the movie where the creature Adam runs into his old girlfriend from back before he was a creature, and she doesn't recognize him, and I thought this was so stupid because it's the same actor playing both characters. He just has a few scars on his face now. But then while doing research, I found out that's actually not true. Apparently they are two different actors, but can you blame me? Look at these two white boys and tell me they don't look the same. Depraved premiered at the What the Fest Film Festival and received mostly positive reviews. More thoughts on that later. But this film, in short, is about a murdered man who was brought back to life by this PTSD-riddled man named Henry. Henry also has this friend/business partner, Polidori, more on his name in a second, who is testing this new drug out on Adam. What is the drug? What does it do? Couldn't tell you. It's literally so underdeveloped as an idea. There's also this dumbass subplot where Polidori is trying to get Adam and Henry to turn against each other. But why? Why would he do that? What would he possibly gain from that? Anyway, later in the film, Polidori admits that he was the one who originally killed Adam so that Henry could test his theory on how to bring people back to life. But then he says something that broke my brain. He says that Henry is like the real-life Frankenstein.
Dr. Henry Frankenstein. Henry, not Victor, just like in the movie.
And to that I have to say, huh? So you're telling me that in the universe of this film, both the novel Frankenstein and the 1931 film adaptation exist. And for what reason would the writer make this decision? If anything, it just makes everyone look stupider. Not to mention how crazy of a coincidence it would be to not only have someone named Henry become Frankenstein like in the movie, but to also have a friend named Polidori, which, let's address it now. Polidori is the name of Lord Byron's physician, the same one who was vacationing in Lake Geneva with him when Byron pitched the story writing contest that Mary Shelley participated in and wrote Frankenstein. So you're telling me that not only does the novel Frankenstein exist in this universe, but that a guy named Henry and a girl named Liz, short for Elizabeth, and another guy named Polidori just so happen to all come together and create a Frankenstein's monster just like in the book that exists in their universe, and then name that monster Adam, just like how the creature refers to himself in the book that one time. That's fucking wild. And my second big gripe with this film is how Adam chooses to get revenge. So it's not explicitly shown, but it's pretty heavily implied that the first thing Adam does as his revenge is rape Henry's girlfriend, Liz. Why would that be what he does? I know the writer wants you to know that Adam's lonely and craves physical affection, and I guess this was his way of showing the consequences of Adam being denied that affection, but it's just not it. Like in the book and every other adaptation, that resentment is manifested through the creature killing everyone Victor loves to deny him that same affection. But I guess that just wasn't edgy enough for this modern spin on the story, and the writer just had to write this assault into the script. And maybe I wouldn't hate this so much if we were meant to hate Adam, but we're not. We're meant to feel sorry for him, and somehow the writer still wants you to feel sorry for him after this scene. And no, bitch, I don't feel sorry for him. I fucking hate him now. Congrats, Larry. You're the first guy to ever make me despise the creature. Great job, I guess. This film was the longest hour and 50 minutes of my life. It felt like a 3-hour movie. Look, I think this film had some really great ideas. It had things to say about how untreated PTSD can destroy relationships, how pharmaceutical companies have more interest in selling a product rather than keeping people healthy, how the wealthy exploit the poor, but they all felt completely underdeveloped and didn't really lead anywhere narratively. Not to mention, the whole third act felt extremely forced. Everyone's motives were nonsensical. But other than this film just being bad, I think what I really hate about it is how self-congratulatory it feels. They really do a whole victory lap, patting themselves on the back for what they thought they did at the end with this whole voiceover monologue Adam gives about some philosophical bullshit. And to make matters worse, I can tell this is also the kind of film pretentious film nerds say is really groundbreaking and give it all the praise when it's really very surface level and honestly poorly executed. But they got the message, and because they got the message, they think they're so smart and the film is so smart and that everyone who didn't like it just didn't get it, man. But no! I got it. I got exactly what they were going for. But this film fell completely short of what it was going for. And it fell on its face, and it tripped down the stairs, and it landed on its ass for everyone to see. And still, somehow, people applauded. Okay, that's it. I'm done with this one. Let's move on to something good. Now for the moment we've all been waiting for. It's time to talk about Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein that came out earlier this month. I was extremely excited for this film, but also extremely scared of it. I've always loved Guillermo's work. How could I not? He's Gothic and Mexican. He's just like me for real. But as you can tell, I hold Frankenstein adaptations to some pretty high standards, and I was really worried I wouldn't like this one. Especially when the cast was announced. Oscar Isaac plays Victor, no notes, love the choice. Mia Goth plays Elizabeth. Okay, I'm a little wary of this one. I've always been a fan of Mia Goth's acting, but I'm not sure how she'll fare in this role. And then Jacob Elordi as the creature. And this one made me shudder. I was so scared when I heard this casting, disappointed even. Jacob Elordi is tall, sure, but I've only seen him play detached pretty boy roles. I was extremely doubtful he would be able to do the creature justice. And obviously, there are going to be some spoilers in my review, so go watch the movie first if you don't want me to spoil it for you. So, good news. I really, really enjoyed this film. It may not have been terribly book accurate in terms of story, but it felt very true to the book in terms of themes. And in fact, I think it took those themes and expanded on them or tweaked them in ways I really loved. I especially loved the added father-son elements, the parallels between the way Victor's dad treated him and how Victor treated the creature were just so good. Not to mention, this was the only adaptation I've seen that actually felt truly gothic. This might sound weird, but I always get this cozy, comforting feeling whenever I read gothic horror, and Guillermo's movies have always managed to capture that feeling on the screen. It just really sells it for me. This isn't the first adaptation to change the ending to give Victor and the creature reconciliation at the end, but it's the first to give the message that the creature shouldn't give up on life and keep trying to live. And I love that so much. It's such a beautiful update to the story. A friend of mine said he didn't like the ending very much because he felt the creature forgave Victor too easily, and I see where he's coming from, but to me, I felt the creature forgave Victor not just because he was sorry, but because he encouraged him to keep living. And that's what I think the creature really wanted. He wanted a reason to live. So when Victor finally gives him that reason, that's when he's able to forgive him. But I do have my own beef with the end of this movie, specifically the quote by Lord Byron of all people. Like, who the hell do you think you are? Putting a quote by the guy who hated Mary's story. The disrespect. But not gonna lie, it's thematically relevant, and it's also low-key kind of funny. But I also want to mention how incredibly impressed I was by Jacob Elordi's performance. I truly doubted him. I didn't think he had it in him, but it's honestly probably my favorite depiction of the creature so far. He does a fantastic job of playing this innocent, broken, sad, big little guy. He drips with sympathy. He made me cry for real. I'm not gonna lie. Jesus, I might cry just thinking about it. God, I could gush about this movie all day, but this video is already crazy long. I'm already dreading thinking about editing it. And I know it's probably cliche to end the video like this, but this one might have been my favorite adaptation so far. I think what I've realized by doing this video is that I don't vibe with most Frankenstein adaptations, not because they're too different from the book, but because they try too hard to be the same. In fact, some of my favorite adaptations were the ones that took creative liberties with the story in order to better uphold the themes of the original novel. So honestly, exactly the opposite of how I feel about adaptations of the Dracula novel. You stay away from those Dracula themes during your adaptations. Get back! I know there are a million Frankenstein adaptations I didn't cover. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to cover all of them, so I decided to only cover the adaptations I felt were the most well-known or most influential, or at the very least included both a scientist and a creature. So that's why I didn't cover films like I, Frankenstein or Lisa Frankenstein, but if you want me to cover those kinds of adaptations, let me know in the comments. As is tradition with my Evolution videos, we must pay our respects to the fallen adaptations that were not mentioned in this video. A moment of silence, please. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, if you subscribe, you too can spit in God's face and commit the ultimate act of hubris. But if the idea of developing a God complex instead of seeking therapy doesn't appeal to you, don't even worry about it. Bye!